moment making, building a company and a movement at the same time, and what it means to live life in the front row. All right. Hey ho, let's go. Hello, my legendary friends, and welcome to this fantastic episode of Legends and Losers. Am I ever glad you joined us? Our guest today is the legendary Jon Vroman, and he's an incredibly inspiring speaker, author, and entrepreneur. And he's the founder of an amazing nonprofit, which I will tell you about in a second. Now, if you're new to Legends and Losers, welcome. We are stoked to have you. Hal Elrod called us one of the best podcasts of all time, and Sabrina Horn calls us the podcast Silicon Valley needs. And I sure hope that we are the podcast that you need. Our goal here is to try to have a inspiring dialogue around what it takes to design a legendary business and a legendary life. And we hope you're getting into it. And I got to share with you, we haven't talked about this much in a while, but there's something going on. It feels like Legends and Losers is hitting, and actually the book Play Bigger, it just feels like to me that it's hitting some kind of a tipping point here. From the inbound, we're getting people all around the world. There seem to be a lot of people in Australia. So if you're in Australia, thank you. We seem to be picking up a lot of listeners in Sweden. And maybe that's because of our friend, Dr. Samuel West, the curator and founder of the Museum of Failure in Sweden, who we think is our official museum of Legends and Losers. And he was on an episode not that long ago. Anyway, I don't know what's going on, but all of us here at Legends and Losers just want to tell you thank you. It is incredibly rewarding to get your tweets, your emails, your LinkedIns, et cetera, et cetera. And we know you're sharing the show. And, Legends and Losers is a labor of love. I got an email from someone recently that was very laudatory. And he had a criticism, however. He said, yeah, but, I got to tell you, Chris, you guys could be doing a much better job at monetization. And I had to laugh. And I responded back saying, yeah, we could probably do a much better job at monetization. Our monetization strategy is we don't have one. If you're a regular listener, you know that Legends and Losers is really a labor of love. And, while we might do some monetization down the road, and we have a few sponsors who are friends, the reality is we have no monetization strategy. Legends and Losers is our attempt to create a platform for authentic dialogue around what it takes to build a legendary business and a legendary life. So thank you if you're a longtime listener, and if you're new, we hope you get addicted. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about our friends at NetSuite. NetSuite is the #1 company in cloud ERP, so think finance, accounting, manufacturing, distribution, commerce, etc. And really, NetSuite is the company that is the category designer of cloud ERP. And their main focus, or one of their primary focuses, is on supporting and empowering entrepreneurial growth businesses. And so I'm stoked to be on tour with my friends Jason Maynard and the rest of the team at NetSuite. And we are flying around the country, and we're going to go up to Toronto as well and talk about what it takes to design a legendary business, how technology can level the playing field, and a lot of good stuff like that. So August 24th, San Diego, September 20, Denver, September 26th, Toronto, and September 27th, beautiful New York, and November 9th in Miami. Come see us on the NetSuite Next Ready Business Tour. And to request your VIP invitation to one of those cities, send email to blackhole@legendsandlosers.com. Also want to let you know that our friends at Wildcat Ventures are putting on an exclusive executive event in San Francisco. And I am super stoked to be joining my friend, Bruce Cleveland, who destroyed my net worth and my self-worth at the same time in my late 20s when he and the other co-founders of Siebel Systems became the category king in CRM. And I can't thank him enough for doing that because, as you know, we all learn a lot more from losing than we do from winning. And I learned a lot from that painful loss. And it's great to be back in touch with Bruce. And so on September 6th in San Francisco, 5:30 to 8:30 in the evening, we're going to be having a dialogue called How Legends Design and Dominate categories. And it's at the Dog Patch Wine Works in San Francisco. If you want your VIP invitation to that event as well, email blackhole@legendsandlosers.com. Come on out, have a cocktail or two. We'll be signing copies of Play Bigger, and it'll be a great night in San Francisco. All right, Jon Vroman. I love this guy. And it's not just because he and I share a hairdo. He's much better looking with his shaved head than mine. My buddy Mike Maples Jr., who's, as you know, one of the most legendary VCs in Silicon Valley, and a prior Legends and Losers guest. By the way, if you have not checked out the Mike Maples episode, he will blow your mind because he challenges every assumption we have about the economy and therefore how we should build and design legendary businesses and categories. Anyway, one of the things that Mike has said is that at Floodgate Capital, he and his partners look for entrepreneurs who can not just create companies, but can start movements, can mobilize people to action. Well, our guest today, Jon Vroman, is a moment maker and a movement maker, if you will. He's a rock star, award-winning public speaker. He's an extreme athlete, ultra marathoner. He hosts a great podcast that I was lucky enough to be a guest on when Play Bigger came out, called The Front Row Factor. He's the founder of the Front Row Foundation, a nonprofit established in 2005 that creates inspiring experiences for individuals who are braving life-threatening illnesses. And so his goal is really to make a difference for people struggling with really the ultimate struggle. So it's a very powerful idea. He hosts this amazing event called the Front Row Dads Retreat, which will be coming to Santa Cruz soon. So I hope to see some of those front row dads. And he has a brand new book out called, you guessed it, The Front Row Factor. And it came out as a screaming bestseller. It's subtitled, Transform Your Life with the Art of Moment Making. And so with that, my good friend, Jon Vroman. So is somebody going to go fix the fact that your Wikipedia page has a picture of some other bald dude on it?
I hope so. But what's interesting about that whole process is there's actually, you can't have somebody that's connected to you update the page. And I don't know how they track that, but they do somehow.
So they know that your mom is not doing your Wikipedia page for you?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Because, man, if everybody thought what my mom thought, life would be different for me. I don't know about
Totally.
I often tell people I'm just trying to be the man my mother thinks I am.
That's right. Yeah, totally. Yep.
So how are you, Jon?
I'm good, man. I'm really good.
What have you been up to?
I did this.
Oh, wow. That's an incredible front row tattoo you have there on your forearm. What made you decide to get some, is that, do you have ink or is that first time ink?
No, that's second.
Second time ink.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to get a very noticeable tattoo of your brand on your forearm? You better like this brand.
Dude, it's.
Talk about personal branding, Jon.
Dude, I'll tell you, here's what happened. Last year at our summit in Cleveland, and I don't know how much of this story you want, but I'll tell you the 60-second story is
Jon, this is Legends and Losers. We could chase any rabbit down any zebra hole we fucking want.
Well, dude, here's the story. Actually, you tell me, man. Do you want the 1, 2, or 3 minute version?
I want the one you want to share with me.
All right, so here's the story. The story is that last year we were going to have a board meeting, and it was me and Berghoff and the rest. And I say that because I know you and maybe your listeners know Johnny B. But we were going to have a board meeting in Cleveland, and then the conversation became, how do we invite other people to the table? Recipients or family members, fans, donors, all the people. Well, we eventually had 35 people at our meeting. And then it turned into if we got everybody together, let's have some personal growth conversation. Let's have maybe a spontaneous auction, where we can raffle some stuff off. And sitting on his back porch.
Did
do you know the story?
Do the auction? No,
yeah,
I don't know. I don't know the story. Did Berghoff did the auction?
Yeah, 100%. He started it.
He's good at that. He sold my ass out. He pimped my ass out. at a conference. And I agreed to do like a 1-hour coaching session. And before you knew it, I did a 2-day offsite for 15 guys. And that
Yeah,
all
that's
that
right.
happened in like 2 seconds. While I was on stage, I had no, he's like, hey, can I auction off a little bit of your time for one life? And I said, sure. And before you know it. So did he do the same thing to you? It kind of sounds like maybe he did.
It was some form of that. But what ended up happening was we raised $83,000 sitting around a campfire. And then somebody said, let's get to 100. My buddy, my best friend, John Kane said, I'll get a front row tattoo if we get to 100. And then that sparked this had a new energy to the conversation. And that next thing you know, this guy, Scott, raises his hand. Now, Scott's like this mid
Scott
40s.
Lowry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Scott.
Yeah.
He guest hosted on the Berghoff episode of Legends and Losers, and I've seen he's got a front row tattoo on his inner bicep, right? And I was like, wow, holy shit.
Well, he was one of the guys. So, and he's, by the way, totally sober, absolutely like father of 2 teens, like doesn't have any ink. And he's like, I'll do one. I'm like, are you serious? And then a woman named Sue Adams raised her hand. And I just threw my hand up and I was like, of course, I've been thinking about it.
You're the founder of Front Row. You sort of, when other people are doing it, you sort of are being shamed into it, right?
So I'm number 6. I can tell you one more great story, by the way.
Yeah, tell me.
So this was the first tattoo ever. There was a guy named Derek Boykins. And Derek went to go see the 76ers play. Derek's this like mid-30s father, very soft-spoken, reserved, poised guy, right? And he went to the event. And I told the team afterwards, I'm like, I'm not sure if Derek really loved the event because he was so reserved in his emotions. Well, a couple days after the event, somebody had texted me and said, looks like you're not the most committed person to front row. And I was like, what are you talking about?
How can that be?
Look at Facebook. And I checked out Derek's picture and he had tattooed across his back, shoulder to shoulder, live life in the front row. And he did it not only, and I say, he didn't just put the words live life in the front row, which is one of our mottos or taglines. He actually did it in our font, the font that we use to write it.
Well, if you're going to do it, you got to use the official font.
Got to go all the way.
You got to stay with the branding guidelines here, John.
That's it. That's why this one on my forearm ended up the way it did.
That's awesome. And hey, congratulations on your book. You and I have not spoken other than digitally since your book Front Row Factor came out. Holy shit, Batman!
I'm fired up about it. Yeah,
I mean, you got a billion. Even though you and I know each other, I do, believe it or not, I do my homework ahead of these dialogues, although it probably never sounds like it. And, just the Amazon reviews, some of the third-party reviews. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for, what I think a lot of people might think of, John, is just like, okay, another kind of motivational book.
Yeah.
So what made you want to write Front Row Factor?
Well, I felt like I needed to tell the story. People kept asking me to tell the story. Our mutual friend, Hal Elrod, kept encouraging me to put this in writing and share it because it's good for everybody across the whole system, including our recipients. One of the missions of our charity is not just to put, and I'll give a quick explanation. So Front Row Foundation is this charity back in 2005 that a small group of friends got together and started because we wanted to make a difference. And this is a charity that puts kids and adults who have a life-threatening illness in the front row of their favorite live event. But what happened was it quickly moved from like a day, just being all about one day, to being about a lifestyle. So living life in the front row became our mission to help people, no matter how many days they had, to live every day in the front row. And really all that means to us is getting close to the things that matter most to you. That's the metaphor of being in the front row. And so the book was, as I like to say, it's everything we learned about living life from people who are fighting for it. So after 11 years of witnessing...
let me make sure I understand, John. So all of the recipients of the things that you do at the foundation, Front Row Foundation, are people whose lives are currently threatened.
That's right. Yep. 100%. Yeah. Not terminal, but life-threatening for sure. Yep. And that's what's happened. So nearly 100 events later, our friends, basically this group of people they're doing this evenings and weekends. This is their way of giving back to the world, or not giving back as some people would like to say, but just making a difference, just contributing, just finding a way to ease suffering, add value to somebody's life. And there's so many ways to do that. And this is just our way.
I love it. And it's interesting. At the highest level, if you want to do good in the world, easing suffering is like a great place to start, right?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And it's if anybody out there listening has ever suffered in any way, shape, or form, and somebody showed up for you, you probably remember that. I remember my dad taught me that a long time ago. He said, in the critical times of life, it's important you show up for people. It's important that you show up all the time, but it's important especially during critical moments. And I could think about times in my life, whether it be a bad breakup with a girlfriend or whatever it might be, and somebody showed up in that time. I never forgot that. My dad always talks about weddings or funerals or big moments in people's lives. And it's interesting when people show up. Our buddy Hal, who's fighting cancer right now, or
Yeah,
actually
I saw
no,
on Facebook you were just it looked like you were just hanging out with him. Is that right?
yeah, I went to the hospital and spent a day. I wrote this, you might have seen. I said I showed up thinking I was going to serve. I'm here to support my buddy Hal. I'm going to make his life better.
And he's telling jokes and shit, right?
The first thing he does, he's like, "Hey, buddy, want a smoothie?" And he's like telling me all about this smoothie. He's selling the smoothie. He's such a he loves to share. You think he's an investor in all these products,
Smoothie companies or something.
right? Like he's a part owner of the smoothie company, but really he's just passionate about it. And he's making me smoothies. He's telling me jokes. He's giving me a tour of the hospital. I'm like, I thought I was supposed to be lifting you up, and I'm feeling better about myself being around him.
Yeah, and here's this guy battling cancer, making you feel good.
That's it. Yeah.
And so, what's this thing? I know in the book you call it moment making, right? Is that what you're talking about, John?
Yeah, for us, your whole life is just made up of a bunch of moments, and that we wanted to make the most of each one of those because we don't know how much time we have, because tomorrow is guaranteed to nobody. And moment making just became about either recognizing what we call a front row moment or creating one. And that front row moment being close to things that are important to you. So a front row moment for many people in our community is watching the sun rise or the sunset. That's a front row moment. Or watching your kid take their first step. Or it could be something exciting for you where it's you found the job or a mission or a cause or a purpose that you're supposed to be connected to. Meeting amazing people. These are all front row moments. And our goal was to bring people back to the present moment. And I can tell you how we got there. I think this is a critical piece.
I hate to interrupt you, but
yeah, go.
I'm going to. You said something right off the top there. Tomorrow is guaranteed to no one.
Yeah.
Where did you come to that, or why did you come to that?
Well, you see it all over the place. I think you watch people like Hal. Ready is a perfect example, and he's very close friend of mine. So this is top of mind because he's in the hospital right now, or actually, he just got back home. Sorry, but he, Hal is like the healthiest guy imaginable. And yet he wakes up one day, he calls me up. He's like, I'm going to go to the hospital because my lungs are filling with this fluid. And it's literally in an instant, something happens. Now, Hal's also another great example because when he was 19, he was hit head on by a drunk driver. Just driving home and somebody got on the highway the wrong way.
How many surgeries did he have after he got hit by that drunk driver?
I don't remember how many surgeries, but I know
it was many, right?
Oh, he broke his body was shattered. 11 bones were broken. He was in a coma for 6 days. His heart had stopped for 7 minutes on the scene. Like it was
the
very
photos
serious.
that he has shared with me about, him in the hospital are just, there's few things as frightening as seeing somebody you love in the hospital full of tubes and cords and all that stuff. Yeah. And even though I saw those photos of how when I first met him, you can't be a human being and see that and not think, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Hey, I have a buddy, and this is it, by the way. I share this.
How old was Hal? Sorry. How old was Hal when he got hit?
He was 19.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah. It's crazy. And these stories aren't meant to, and I write about this in the book, they're not meant to make us sad, although there's certainly sad elements to them. They're eventually meant to inspire us to say, look, I have to make the most of this day because anything can happen. I have a friend whose mother was at home and she was literally taking the day off of work and she was cooking and there was a gas line explosion underneath her house. That was it. She was in the kitchen. So I think that it's important for all of us to know that, listen, it's good to wear your seatbelt or to eat healthy foods and to try to take care of yourself. But when it's your time, it could be your time. And that's it. It's just done. So
we have a lot of added risk here in Santa Cruz because everybody knows when the aliens come, John, they're going to come to Santa Cruz first
Of
because
course.
they could just blend in. Nobody
Yeah.
would even know who the
Nobody's gonna
fuck
know.
was who. Because in this town, you could go to the nicest restaurant. You can go to dinner in your pajamas.
That's right.
My favorite, I think it's a hardware store up on one of the main streets here, John, where they have one of those old school signs with the lettering that you can change each letter,
Yeah.
and so they change it and they're pretty funny. And my favorite one they do is Halloween ... or as we call it here in Santa Cruz, Thursday.
Right. Yeah. Well,
So
I mean,
anything can get you at any time, right?
I mean, that's the point. That's the point. And that's why
And so
we want people to be moment makers. Right.
we all know that intellectually.
Yeah.
And yet we go through our life day to day, and many of us don't live, to use your term, in a moment making kind of a mindset.
Yep.
Um, and it's funny how tragedy wakes us up, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so how can we, John, sort of have that consciousness around living my most legendary life moment to moment in a situation where there's no horrible thing reminding me that's what I should do, right?
Yeah. 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 And I don't think that somebody has to have ongoing constant tragedy in their lives to be that reminder. I do think that it's important that we get connected to all these pieces of life. And so it might be that if you're not fighting a life-threatening illness, that maybe by showing up for somebody that is, you'll be reminded of that. That any time that we get a chance to go out and serve in the community and meet some people that aren't as fortunate as we are, my kids' lives are changed, or my life has changed. I remember going to do a trip in Dominican, and I was in this very, very poor village with our buddy, probably Jon Vroman, and he and I went down there. And
he's actually coming on Legends and Losers.
Is he?
I got to ask John this question, which is Jon Vroman. Why are all you fucking guys named John, by the
way? That's right.
Anyways, I'll speak of you in your last names. I like that anyway. I've been called Lochhead my whole life. I like that sort of sports last name thing. Anyway, so the question I'm dying to ask Rulin is, what did you do to all these fucking guys such that a fucking gift shows up at my house every week? Yeah. Like, I get shit from you guys all the time. Let me show you this. Because I think it's funny, and it happens to be in the Legends and Losers studio. Can you see this thing?
Yeah, what is it?
It's
an F-bomb.
Yeah, it's an F-bomb.
That's classic.
It looks like one of those sort of Bugs Bunny bombs and a small F on it, and it sits here right on my studio desk, and it's funny as shit. And Berghoff sent this to me, and he sent me those headphones that you're wearing, and all this other shit shows up. And same thing with Lowry. Lowry bought me a fucking surfboard with the Legends and Losers logo on both sides, the top and the bottom, and a Big Lebowski quote. And like, what is it with you fucking guys and all these gifts? You're so fucking nice.
God, it's culture. That's culture, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. We do. We have, this is, you asked about how do we stay in the moment. And what I write about in the book are these three elements that we saw showing up for people that do. So if you study the people that do stay in the moment, how do they do it? They always have this empowering mindset, and their mindset comes from the questions they ask. And that's conditioning.
Slow down.
Yeah.
Some of us didn't go to school here, Verman. They have did you say an empowering mindset?
Yeah. It's the way they think about things.
That?
All right, let me give you an example. I'm better through stories.
Now, before you do that,
yeah,
there's something I think it's important to tease out, right? Which is the difference between thinking and having thoughts, right? Because you and I are always having thoughts. There's always thoughts rolling through our head, like, "Oh, I would like a cookie," and isn't whiskey wonderful? And things go through our heads, right? We'd really love to see that lady without her clothes on, or whatever it is, right? But those are sort of the thoughts that troll through our head. That we're not doing anything to have those, right? They just show up, and they're random, and sometimes they're awesome, and sometimes they're just observant, and sometimes, of course, they're freaking horrible. And the thing that I've noticed, John, is that people who design the most legendary lives, they start with distinguishing, if you will, between those things that just roll through our heads that aren't really thoughts. I don't know. We need a word for those things
Mm-hmm.
that those things that roll through, those observations or ideas that roll through our head. And then actual stopping and fucking thinking.
Right.
So with that said, I got to believe there's a consciousness to developing this moment making mindset you're talking about that is different than the rolling zebras through my head.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, much of it is a very practiced, intentional piece of people's lives. Now, sometimes people find it because they have a life-threatening illness or because they have a tragic situation, either with themselves or with somebody they love, or they hear somebody talk about it in a way like you just did that articulates it so perfectly that they're like, I get it. I understand the difference between those two.
And so how do I stay conscious? Because where I get into trouble is where my monkey brain
100%.
fires and, I want to go do something that is, shall we say, out of alignment with my core values.
Right.
I'll give you a simple example. I got home last night and there's a bunch of fucking cigarette butts on my street outside my house. And I know who's doing it. And it's 2 houses down. I went 2 houses down, I don't know, about a month ago, and I knocked on the door. And I thought I was being, very Fonzie about it. And I talked to the dad of the house, and I said, hey, and I had them in my hand. And I said, don't we want to have a nice neighborhood here? And, oh, by the way, we live 2 blocks from the beach, and you know where these go? They go into the mouth of an otter.
Mm.
So can we kind of not do this, please? They look disgusting. Anyway, so I get home last night, and what do I see? There's fucking cigarette butts everywhere. And I know this sounds stupid, but man, I just want to make those people pay when that happens.
Yeah.
And I get really, really fucking mad. And my IQ understands that I'm overreacting, but my EQ wants to put people in a pine box.
I totally relate.
So how do I, John, in that situation, and my wife Carrie, God bless her, she's so fucking awesome. She doesn't take the bait. Some people might go, "Oh, Christopher, you're so fucking rah," and get right on you about being angry about that.
Yep.
And she just stands back, lets the old bear blow off his steam, make all the threats I want to make about, dropping a bomb on their house and stuff, and let me, simmer down. And so other than that, how do I stay present in that moment and remember my core values are not that they're actually the opposite of that?
Yeah. Well, I think that, I did an interview with Juliana Ray. Have you met her yet? As she's part of our community.
The name rings such a strong bell. Why do I know Juliana Ray?
She's a mindfulness expert.
Berghoff talked about
Yep.
her when he came on Legends and Losers, and I actually had some fun email exchange with her.
So one of the ways we found Juliana, because the guy I talked about earlier, John Kane, who got the first front row tattoo, he hired Juliana to be his mindfulness coach for an Ironman. And
now,
then Juliana,
what is this? What is this thing, mindfulness, John? I hear about this a lot lately. What was this? Some airy fairy West Coast, I smoke too much pot thing, or what is this?
I mean, essentially, this is awareness, as I see it. That's how I would define it. This is an awareness, and that you can train yourself to be more aware of the emotions that are boiling up inside, more aware of those thoughts that you're having versus the thinking that you want to be doing. And this is also, it's not airy fairy any longer. They're doing some really incredible research.
I know it's an important topic. I just had my mom, Jackie, here. We like to go do little day trips and things like that. And so we went to Half Moon Bay while she was here. And we spent, the afternoon there and walked around, had a nice meal and this and that. And while we were there, we walked into the bookstore in Half Moon Bay. Now, you can imagine a bookstore in Half Moon Bay, right, John?
Well, I've never been there, but I'm going to guess based on where you're taking this. Yes.
Well, just imagine a West Coast
Right,
Pacific,
exactly.
small Pacific town
Right.
with a bookstore in it
Yeah.
that's 45 minutes south of San Francisco. So just sort of think Berkeley by the sea, and
There you
you'll
go.
sort of be
Exactly.
about right.
Yep.
Anyway, long story longer, I walk in, and it felt like to me half the fucking books in the place were about mindfulness.
Sure. Yeah. Well, mindfulness addresses my number one fear in life, which is getting to the end and going, fuck, I wish I would have, been more present and aware along the way. Because the whole thing is about appreciating and enjoying something, or making a difference, or being able to make an impact where you are. By the way, even like for me, surfing as an example, I think is the most beautiful example of being totally present to the situation. If you're everywhere else other than there, then it just takes away from that whole experience.
Well, and actually, if I could, surfing's a really powerful example, even more so, I think, than skiing for me, because if moment making or mindfulness is about being fully present in that moment, there's no past, there's no future, there's just you and whatever else is there. If that's what is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
So if that's what we're talking about, the amazing thing about surfing, and I think this is why it transcends, it goes from sport or pastime to kind of religious experience for people, is being on a wave. And I'm going to use this word, but it's not really the right word. I don't know what is. Maybe you can help me. Being on a wave forces you to be in the moment.
That's right.
It's impossible to be thinking about the grocery list on a wave.
Yeah.
You're just fully present, dancing with that wave.
Yeah.
And everything else goes away, including other surfers, like everything. Even people can yell at you on the wave, and often you don't hear anything, not because you're not actually hearing them, but just because you're so fully present dancing with the ocean. And so I think that's why people get so addicted to it. It's certainly the kind of core source of my addiction to it. The thing I've often wondered is it possible to be that fully present when things aren't critical? You know what I mean? There's something about being on a wave that's critical and important. Like the wave forces you to be present in a way that very few other, and force is probably not the right word, but it I don't know, you are fully present because of the wave,
Yeah.
for sure. And so the question is, in my mind, is it possible to be that way in moments that most of us would not interpret as critical?
That's right. Well, then we have to redefine what critical is. I think that we have to, for each of us, we need to look at like what's truly critical. Some people look at each conversation with their kids as like a critical conversation. These words that I'm about to share can either build or destroy this inner dialogue that my kids are having. I think that's how we shape it. Yeah, I view so many things as critical moments, and it doesn't lose its effect. It's enhancing my experience of life because I view that moment as something that's really critical, not just as a, hey, I can only be on a wave, that this dinner with these friends could be the moment.
But how do you stay that conscious? Like your adrenaline's going, your cortisol's flying, your fight or flight is fully on.
Yeah.
I have that same experience, boxing or training martial arts, particularly sparring. When you got somebody in front of you who's trying to fucking smash you, it's very focusing.
Yeah.
And so,
are we talking about the anger piece of this, or like because
actually,
this is important. This is important for me. Like,
it's interesting because fighting angry is probably the worst thing
Totally.
Any fighter can do.
100%.
My master sensei Sitan says that the fighter who wins is the most relaxed fighter.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm doing anything, he says, relax.
Yeah.
Relax more. I can hear him. And even when he's not around, I can hear him in my head. When I'm doing something and I find, I'm overly intense about it, I can hear Sensei Sitan in my head saying, relax more.
Well, have you heard of the cow in the parking lot, a Zen approach to overcoming anger? Have you heard this book?
No, but the title is interesting.
So it's fascinating. So check this out. So, I mean, here's the intro to the book. The guy, the author talks about how if you're pulled into a parking spot or you've been waiting for a parking spot, somebody else takes the spot And then you flip out, right? Like you want to go, and he just had, it's, you key the car, let the tires out, or let the air out of the tires, have a conversation, write something on the windshield, all these things, that you feel these emotions about somebody who did you wrong. And then he goes, but what happens if you were going to turn into this parking spot and a cow walked in and just sat down and just looked at you and moo, right? And it's like, you wouldn't have that same level of anger to the cow that you would have towards somebody who pulled into the parking spot. But why is that? Both, your parking spot was taken. It's just a story that we make up in our minds about what it means to us. And so this has really had a profound effect on my ability to manage my emotions. For me, that's training of the mind. That's literally seeing things in enough different ways, enough of these metaphors, enough of these ideas, enough of these conversations, enough people around me that are more Zen, that allow me to absorb some of their emotions or thoughts or processes of how they handle it.
But we live in a culture, John, where I'll just speak for myself, where that in the moment thought is not an in moment thought. It's what's true. That fucking asshole took my parking spot and I'm going to make him pay, right?
Yeah.
At least that's what shows up for me. Now, actually, interestingly enough, that doesn't show up for me anywhere near with the level of frequency that it used to. So maybe I'm evolving.
You are, man. You are.
I get to a place where I'm like, and again, it doesn't always go this well, but when those kinds of things happen, I just think, oh, well, if you want the fucking spot. Like surfing is a great example. Surfing is the environment that I'm in that can get the most aggro, even more so than driving.
Yeah.
Because there can only be one surfer on a wave. And so if somebody else gets on your wave, or you get on somebody else's wave, there's often, shall we call it, a dialogue that happens in the water.
Yeah.
and that can make people really angry. And I've gotten to a place where, at least in the water, for the most part, I think, you know what? If you want the wave, you can have it. Now, you can have it once. If you do it again, you and I are going to have a conversation. And if you do it a third time, you're not going to like it. But but at least the first time, I can summon my inner Vroman.
I don't know. I mean, I got to tell you, I bought the book about reducing anger because this is an issue for me. Like the reason I'm reading that book is because this is an issue.
So you want to put them in a pine box too?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is, and actually I have a label for this part of my personality, which is Officer Vroman. When I believe I'm totally right, and it's my job to regulate the world.
It's interesting you said that, because I remember, and it wasn't, I'm embarrassed to say this to you, but it wasn't that long ago when I figured out it is not my job to educate every asshole in the world. But as silly as that sounds, it's very freeing.
Yeah.
Now I still debate that. I had a situation not long ago, actually, while my mom Jackie was here. Jackie, Carrie, and I were having dinner downtown, and we had early. We ate a little bit earlier to sit outside and enjoy Santa Cruz. Blah blah. Anyway, they go shopping, and I'm going to take care of the bill and that stuff. So they're gone wherever they're gone, and I'm going to go meet them. And I'm walking up Pacific Ave, which is the main street in downtown Santa Cruz. And behind me, I hear this thing. There's a pizza joint right next to the restaurant we ate at, and with outdoor seating. And I hear this voice say, "Hey, lady, nice box." So I turn around, and there's this attractive woman carrying this big fuck box. And there's 2 or 3 douchebags having pizza. So I turn around, and the first thing I'm doing is assessing, like, is something, are these guys a real threat to this gal or not? And they didn't seem to be. They were sitting down, and they just looked like, I think there was 3 of them. There might have been 2 of them. I can't remember, but they just seemed like, a couple of douchebags. And in that moment, I had to make a decision. Every fiber in my being wanted to put them in a pine box too, because it's not okay in my world that happens. And I've taken a vow of non-escalation, right? And I've come to this more mature place where I realize it's not my job to educate every douchebag in the world. And so I had this moment in that moment where I thought, well, on one hand, she's not having, there's no risk to her. So I don't need to do anything to protect her. That's not what's happening. But at the same time, I thought, this is my fucking town. you're not allowed to fucking do that. That's not okay with me. And if we don't stand up, this will continue. And so I had this debate with myself in my mind as to what I should or shouldn't do in that moment. Um, Now, for whatever reason, I just decided to let it pass, which is a very mature thing for me. It's the opposite of what I would normally do. But for half a day after that, I'm still thinking to myself, it's not okay with me that we live in a town or a world where men say those things to women. And so I should have done something. You go back and forth. And so I guess that leads me to a question, which is, in a moment, how do we summon our best self to make those critical decisions?
I'm gonna give more props to our buddy Hal for a moment, because Hal teaches the miracle morning. And for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, this is 6 steps in the morning. He calls it savers: silence, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, and scribing, which means journaling. But he put this together as a way to take care of ourselves so we can take care of the world. And I always say that the reason that Hal and I are a great team is that the Front Row Foundation, what I do in helping people live every day in the front row or be moment makers, he helps people take care of themselves. And then I help people go out and take care of others. And, being in the front row is this metaphor for showing up for people. I think that we have to show up for ourselves first. I think if you don't take a moment to get yourself centered, aligned, taken care of, that you walk out into the world without these tools, without this mindset, without this practice of visualizing, how do you want to show up in the world? What are the affirmations that are going through your head? You put them there, right? You're the one that conditions your mind. You're the one that takes control of what's happening upstairs to some degree when you are thinking and not having thoughts. So I think that's a big part of it, man. And I think it's about the people that we put ourselves around. And then I think it's about the environments that we put ourselves in that trigger these thoughts. And that's ultimately what we teach it's just about mindset, relationships, and environment. Those are the 3 factors. And I think we all have to take a hard look at those with ourselves and say, what are those creating? And do we like it? And if not, we have to get intentional about shaping it.
So I've heard you talk a lot about, John, how you, quote unquote, show up, how you show up in the world.
Yep.
What does that mean, how I show up?
Well, to me, it's how we show up are the thoughts we're having, the people that we're getting connected to, and the places that we're spending our time. I think that how we show up it's a mindset for sure. So what that means to me is I can show up in service of others. I can show up as somebody that's there to take something away. And I choose to show up as, how can I offer value to this situation? How do I add something to this? This is a off self on purpose philosophy. So I'll give you an example of how we show up. Some people will say that when I talk about living life in the front row, and I talk about being a participant, not a spectator, I talk about the back row is oftentimes this, like, I'm just watching everything go down, and the front row has this different energy. And people go, well, if you're in the front row, you're still a spectator of life, and I want to be on stage in life. I say, I get that. I understand that metaphor also. But I will tell you that if you think that you're in the front row, and you would understand this better than anybody, it's like, ask the band if they care about the front row. Ask the band if the front row is a participant, if their energy makes a difference. So when we show up and we're a better fan, we get a better show. I think that's the line. Ready? So when you show up as a great fan, you get a better show. And that's how we show up in life. We show up to lift people up, to support each other, to cheer people on, and we get a better show.
Is that what you mean by supporting others? If you say Hal's about sort of empowering yourself and you're about supporting others, when you're in the front, if you to use your metaphor, when you're in the front row, somebody else is on stage.
That's right.
Did you make that connection on purpose?
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. Because listen, I want to be on stage too. I'm a professional keynote speaker. I love being on stage. But I have to remind myself, it can't always be about me and what I'm saying and everybody point the spotlight at me, turn the cameras on me. It's at some point, I've got to show up for people and lift them up. Be a fan.
It's interesting because there is one thing that is better as a surfer about riding a legendary wave. And that one thing is watching one of your friends ride no, really. And it sounds crazy. And I know every parent and every person who has children in their life that they love, regardless of whether they're a parent or not. And by the way, from now on, Mother's Day is called Mother and Aunt's Day, and Father's Day is called Father's and Uncle's Day. Because as an uncle, I feel very ripped off by this Father's Day bullshit. But I digress. It, the pure joy of seeing a friend, or when I take kids out surfing, and I see a child in my life stand up on a wave for the first time. That's better than surfing a great wave. It really is.
Well, listen, I think that we spend a lot of time wondering why people aren't more supportive of our dreams. And I say we collectively as a society, because I've just worked with a lot of people for a lot of years now. And my life started to shift when I have what I think my top 8, my front row. I call this my front row, top 8 relationships, right? And right now, hanging on my wall next to me are these 8 people. And what I decided was that I was going to know and hold in my conscious their number one dream throughout the year. And my goal was to support my top 8 with their number one goal and dream. Now, for most people, the sad reality.
Oh, slow down here, John.
Yeah.
So you have a board in your, are you in your office or wherever you are? Piece of paper, but you have it up.
Yeah. Okay. Just hanging on my wall.
And it's the dream, the number one dream of the 8 most important people in your life right now.
That's right. Yep.
That's right. That you get focused on their dream.
That's right. Yep.
Wow.
And
that's,
so
that's so simple.
So simple. So simple. And that's something somebody can do today, right now. Like if you took one thing away from this call, it's like write down your 8 most important relationships. And here's your challenge. Write them in order of importance. Literally highest to lowest priority in your life. Write them in order of importance. And then ask yourself, can I list their number one dream? And whether that be a 1 year, 3 year, or whatever you decide, but their number one dream, perhaps even for just this year. And could you get it right? Like if I called all 8 of those people and asked them the same question, would you be 100%? Would you be spot on? For most people, even Chris, for business owners out there, it's like most people can't label those or they can't define those. For their team, their top 8 people on their team, they wouldn't know their dreams.
Do most people know what their number one dream is?
Here's what's great. When you ask that question to somebody, it doesn't matter if they know the answer because the most important thing is the question. In fact, if they don't know the answer, that made it even more critical that you ask the question.
So much the better. Yeah, it's funny because the first thing I thought of when you said it is, what an unbelievable conversation. If I said, my mom just left, I did not sit her down and say, hey, Mom, what's your number one dream in your life right now? I didn't do that. So I don't know the answer to that question. I could guess. I think I'd be pretty right. But you know what? It would still be a fucking guess.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. It's amazing to me sometimes when I think about the fact that I even teach this shit. And then I'm like, and then as I'm teaching it, I'm going, if somebody asked me my dad's number one dream or goal right now, it's been a while since I've asked. Because at one point I did ask, and then like I get busy telling everybody else to ask, and I forget to ask myself. Yeah. That's the reality.
So let's take a step back maybe, John. And I've been dying to have this conversation with you. It seems like to me that there are 12 billion speakers, writers, motivators, etc. And I've been blown away ever since we started Legends and Losers. My inbox is just jammed full of, for lack of a better category term, motivational speakers of one sort or another who are trying to get on Legends and Losers. So I guess my first question is, how do you think about your personal category design? Because you've been able to stand out and differentiate yourself and create a niche in a world where, I think 20 years ago, there just weren't anywhere near the number. Every fucking person I know wants to be or is a coach. I have a friend who's 28 years old and he's dating this new gal. And I said, so what does she do? As he's telling me about, she's a self-actualization coach. I'm like, fucking A. Like, and so in a world where it seems like there are a billion people who do what you do, the level of success you've had is ridiculous. How have you differentiated yourself? How have you done, category design?
Well, I think that I did the reverse of what a lot of people do, which is most people want to build a business, make a ton of money, and then figure out how to give it away. And I got very clear early on that I wanted to build a charity first and then figure out how to support that charity through financial means. And so everything was revolving around the charity. That was one distinction, I think, in
Front
our
Row Foundation.
Front Row Foundation. Yeah. Kids and
And this
adults.
was, and what was it about kids and adults who were in a life-threatening situation?
Yeah.
Why there?
So here's the backstory of that. So 3 things happened to me at the same time in my life that caused the start. One is I got asked. Somebody asked me the question, how would I rate my contribution to the world on a 1 to 10 scale? And just self-assessment, I didn't like my answer. I was like, I don't feel good about how I'm giving to the world. Number 2, I was at a Jason Mraz show. I was in the back row. I could see that the front row is a different life. I was like, wow, how do people get those seats? How do they get there? Do they make enough money to buy them? Is it that they just claim the seats? Did they stand in line forever? Like, how do they get there? And I just remember turning to my girlfriend and saying, life is different in the front row. So that was the second awakening moment for me, this recognition of the way that we live our lives. And then the third thing that happened was I got challenged to run an ultra marathon by a buddy, and that's a 52.4 mile run.
Was it Berghoff?
No. But Berghoff.
He does all that crazy shit too. Who started it first, you or Berghoff?
I started it, and then I got Berghoff to do it with me the next year.
Got it.
And I can tell you, by the way,
and I love his preparation, which is sort of, he does a little bit of yoga.
Oh, there's no preparation. Let
me do a trail running ultra marathon. He's like got to go run. I don't know. He said it when he came on, but like some giant amount of miles, and the most he'd ever run was like 13 or something.
So listen to this. So this is the story. So this is back in 2005. My buddy Jamie challenged me to run this marathon, and in 16 weeks, I had never run more than 2 miles in my whole life. In 16 weeks, we were going to go run it. I got up to 17 miles in the training, and then we went from 17 to 52. That was our leap. And then we finished that one barely. By the way, I can't even call it a run. That was like a walk, crawl, fight, struggle, inch your way to the finish line. But we did it. And here's what was happened. I can tell you the whole story about me and Berghoff the next year. Second year, by the way, I should tell you this real quick. Berghoff calls me because Hal sends out a message to his community and says, John's going to do this ultra marathon. And John was like, no, I'm not. But it was like, he promoted it.
I just told 250,000 people.
I just told 250,000 people that you are. So Berghoff's like, he calls me and he says, let's do it together. I'm like,
was that the crazy run from Cleveland to DC or something?
No, that was different.
Okay, that's a different crazy
level.
run.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Berghoff and I the next year did 52 miles together with 21 days of training. 21 days of training. We went from probably what was like 10 or so miles of training all the way up to 52. And we also did it in 10 hours, which was, for us, was really good. And then Berghoff felt so good at the end of that he then went on to run a 100-mile marathon through the woods. By the way, with huge elevation change. Took him like 27 hours to do. And then he did so well with that he then ran from DC to Cleveland. Amazing. 330 miles. I was with him for most of that trip, biking or running alongside him. But he's an amazing guy. He's an amazing guy. But let me go back to a moment. So here's how the ultra marathon ties into the start of the charity and why it began. Because we got, Chris, somebody said to me, they said, why don't we donate money to charity through this run? And I thought, well, what if we started a charity? What would that look like? Then we got clear about our greatest fear and our greatest love. Now, this is where I think your listeners can benefit. We asked ourselves, what was our biggest fear and our biggest love? Because to me, that's where energy comes from, what we're moving away from or what we're moving towards. And for me, my greatest fear was having my life end early without having lived fully. That was one of my greatest fears, was getting to the end and saying I wasted it.
John, I hate to interrupt you, but I'm going to. You said something there. You said something about energy and moving away from or moving close to. So unpack that one for me.
Yeah, basic human psychology and taught by many, many people all over is this: we move away from something, which is what we don't want in life, and that we get great energy from that. So it's like, I do not want my teeth to fall out of my head, so I'm going to brush my teeth. But it's more out of fear than out of how great my teeth might look at the end of the day, right? It's like, we're moving away from something or towards something. And to me, away is like a fear. It's like what I don't want in life. And for me, that was having a life end early or not living fully. My greatest love was experiences with friends, great moments in life. I lived for the next story, the next epic adventure, the next thing that we're going to do, or we tell that story for years to come. Or like, I get to the end of the day, I'm like, that was a day worth living, right? And a day where I was proud of it. So I thought, what if we help people who are fighting for their life to have the best day of their life? And that's where it began. And then as soon as we said that, all three of these things, giving back, the front row experience, and getting clear about my fear and my love brought me to Front Row Foundation. And the question that you asked originally about branding, or how did we design this category, it was like, we started with the charity. I had a full-time job. I was making 6 figures a year, cushy job. I worked my butt off to get there. I never went to college, by the way. This was like, never went to college. I worked my way up the corporate ladder, and then I found this place, and all of a sudden I was like, how many fancy dinners or nice bottles of wine could I have before I want to do something more meaningful with my life? And so I quit
I don't know,
the job.
you could drink a lot of nice bottles of wine.
Dude, I love wine. And trust me, I drink the best bottles of wine now. But I will tell you that I took that leap. I quit my job without any safety net. I'm not saying that's good advice for people out there, but I went out to become a keynote speaker. 2 years later, I found myself 90 grand in credit card debt. And then the plane finally took off and I made it. And I think that where my brand or my category was designed was staying focused on the charity and then building a business that supports the charity. So everything I do now points to the charity. Everything I do supports the charity.
So would you say that, if you look at sort of legendary personal category design, and a great example of that for me is the t-shirt I have on today, Muhammad Ali. And the thing that is so great to me about Ali is beyond the obvious, because all the obvious is great to me too, and he was my first athletic sort of hero as a kid. But beyond the obvious is Ali was a great category designer, because he created this new category that ultimately made him the most famous athlete in the world, and that category was an advocate boxer. Right, he was an advocate for social justice and human rights, and particularly protesting, of course, the war in Vietnam. And there had never been an athlete at that level that stood up for a cause, and that was, and I'm going to use this word on purpose, different. And then when you layered all the other stuff, incredible boxing, and obviously, he's the greatest trash talker in the history of combat sports, and had the charisma and all of that. And so all those things come together and pow, right? But the thing that was interesting from a purely category design point of view is he differentiated himself by taking a stand and doing that very publicly in a way that we'd never seen a global athlete at that level do. And as a result, he, if you will, prosecuted the Magic Triangle: product, company, and category. Legendary product, boxer, company was delivering boxing, of course. And then category was, this advocate athlete. And so what's your equivalent of, if you will, prosecuting the Magic Triangle?
Yeah. So I think it's, for me, I'm a social entrepreneur. And I think that what I'm doing is my product is probably helping people live life in the front row. That's my product. That's what I do. That's what my deliverable. And I do that through the charity and through keynote speaking.
But the interesting thing is, much like Ali, and you sort of touched it, but you're probably being overly modest, Mr. Vroman. Here you are in debt, but at the same time, your primary driving force is starting a charity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it was.
And so why did you do it backwards? To your point earlier, you said most people, myself included, go out, they work on themselves, they try to make a difference. In my case, try to make some money in the world. And then you get to a place where you've done those things, where you have both experience, relationships, and some financial resources. And then, of course, you wake up one day and you go, hey, fucking A. Like for me, the question in my life as a young man for much of it was, is Christopher going to make it? And once you sort of solve, is Christopher going to make it? Then you wake up and go, okay, like, who am I in the world now? Because I've kind of, for the most part, got myself handled. But to your point, Jon, you did that. You did a 180 on that. You were not handled. You did not have your career. You were starting off on a new career, this public consultant. And, and the way to do that, you started off with the foundation. How did that come to you?
I think this was a matter of me working on me. I've been very selfish for so many years. I mean, talk about going back to my high school days. I barely graduated high school. I got into the wrong things with the wrong crowd, looking for significance, looking to fit in, to be important, for people to notice me. I compromised my values to meet my need for connection. So I would be willing to do anything.
Hold on, slow down. You just said something. I compromised my values to meet my need for connection. Is that what you
That's right.
just said?
Yeah. So I would have this value of, let's say, integrity, right? I valued integrity. My dad taught me this as a kid, and I did value it, but I would forego integrity. I would lie in order to get connected to people, because that need for connection or fitting in or having the world tell me I was important, or girls tell me I was attractive, or they liked me, or friends tell me I was cool.
You are attractive because your hairdo is so fucking sexy.
Yeah.
You and I
I've
should
worked
just
on this for years.
you and I should just walk around in downtown major metropolitan areas and
Just inspire people.
address the screaming fans with our incredible domes.
Uh, totally. Yeah, I had to work hard on this one for years. So funny, but
When did you start shaving your head? Just to digress.
at different times throughout my life. I remember my girlfriend. I was in Italy one time. I was looking up at this big painting in the Vatican, and she took a picture from behind of me looking at this picture, and I looked at it. I'm like, is that the light hitting the back of my head? Or am I going bald? And she's like, oh,
And
no,
how
you're
old
fine.
were you?
I mean, this is like late 20s, and then finally I said, well, if it ever gets too bad, will you tell me? And she goes, sure, I'll tell you. And one day I'm like down working in the yard, and she looks out the window from top down at my head, and she goes, I think it's time. So I took the clue, and I shaved my head. So
It's funny. I see guys. It's typically younger guys, of course, and they're holding on. They have those little wispy
oh, man,
fucking
I get
things
it.
and all of that, and it's like I just want to pull them aside and say, buddy, grow a set and get a fucking shaver and have at it. I have a good friend who about 8 or 10 years ago was still holding on.
Yeah.
And I had that conversation with him, and my wife actually had that conversation with him. He's a very handsome guy, but he was, doing what often guys do. And I don't know if he did the Rogaine thing or I don't know what, but he was clearly, you could just tell, holding on. And between Carrie and I and some other folks in his life, we just say, hey, why don't you just fucking, and he did. And of course, he feels better and more confident. And guess what? He looks a lot better to the ladies.
Yeah. Well, my buddy Phil texted me one time. He goes, hey, just when I was debating, I think I posted on Facebook, should I shave it? And people said, my buddy Phil said the best. He said, fire it before it quits.
Yeah, that's great. I started losing mine around 21 and it just slowly sort of started cutting it shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
And when I first moved to California, I found this legendary barber. And I never went to any of these foo-foo, places. And I never had a woman cut my hair. I guess it was because my mom, I don't know about you, but like, did you go to those old barber shops as a kid?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And I don't know if you had this experience. It's the first time I ever saw a porno mag.
No, not in ours. But
yeah. In the old days, I'll never forget this. My mom dropping me off. There was this sort of, I think it was like a general store called Zeller's.
Yeah.
And it was a shitty store. And on the top of, in one of these tiny shit little malls, and on the top of Zeller's was this barber shop with, 4 or 5 guys in it. And she would just drop me off there, go do whatever she was doing, and come back and get me. And can you imagine a mother today dropping their son off at, 8 years old?
That's great.
And you walk into a barber shop and there's a bunch of guys smoking fucking cigars.
Yeah.
And on the table, like, the sitting table where people are waiting, the waiting room table is littered. Playboys and Penthouse and, all of that stuff. Anyway, long story longer, when I first moved to California, I found this awesome old boxer who was a barber. And I didn't need to get my hair cut by anybody. I was just buzzing it, or I could have just buzzed it. But I loved the guy so much, I kept going for haircuts. But when he finally packed it in, that was the end of it for me.
Well, it's so interesting about sitting down, taking a moment. My buddy John cherishes that haircut every week. Like, he doesn't really need to go every week, but it's like that moment he connects with his barber. Every week. Yeah. Every single week. It's like it's his therapy. He goes, he gets his haircut. He has this great conversation with his barber. And it's like a sacred thing. I think some people appreciate it.
I love it. And I love those old school barbers, man.
Yeah.
The guys that have to get the old blade going and the old.
Our buddy Will Little. You met Will. Didn't you come to an event with
I did meet
Road?
Will Little. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a barber. He's a great barber.
Oh, I didn't know he was a
Yep.
barber.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a profession that it seems like is probably, I don't know if dying is the right word, but on the decline, and
For
it's a
sure.
bummer. Support your local barber.
That's right.
So
That's
when
right.
did you shave your head?
On and off. I did it a couple times. Like I shaved it and then I grew the hair back. So, but this is 10 years plus right now.
Yeah, so you're committed to the look.
I'm in. This is, it's not, I'm not going back anymore. I turned 42 last week and this is what I'm going with forever.
Well, you look very handsome.
Hey, thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. That's why I showed up today. I was waiting for that.
Yeah, you look fantastic. Now, I got to ask you, sort of getting back to this personal category design. Um, a lot of people write these books, and your book came out, what, a couple months ago, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah. About 2 months, 2.5 months.
And it's a bestseller. The Amazon reviews are absolutely
I was blown away.
mental, right?
I was blown
Like
away.
if you're ever having a bad day, you should just read a couple of your Amazon reviews, right?
It's exactly what I do. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, A, how do you write a bestseller? And B, in a world where all these books come out all the time, how do you get the world to pay attention to your book?
So for me, I think that you write a bestseller by write from your heart and then get a lot of help. So that's exactly what we did. In fact, my story of writing the book, if there's people out there listening that want to put a book together, I transcribed it. So I spoke it out loud. I did a whole mind map, actually, if I really go back to the beginning. I did a mind map on my wall. I took all these Post-it notes. I put them all up in the way I wanted to design the chapters. And then I spoke it out loud into a microphone. I told the stories I wanted to tell, and then I transcribed it. And then I paid somebody.
And when you say did you actually, obviously you spoke it. Did you actually transcribe it?
No. I paid somebody to do that. I used a service called Rev and REV. And so Rev transcribed it and then they gave it back to me. And I put those transcriptions after I read through and kind of cleaned them up a little bit. I gave them to somebody else, a friend of mine that I hired, paid them 10 grand to write the book for me because I didn't think I'd ever get it done. And when that person handed me the book back, I realized after reading just the first chapter that this wasn't me. This wasn't a book that I would be able to put my name on and get it out there. And I didn't feel great about it. I read the whole book and I literally tried to edit it at first and then I scrapped it. I went back to the drawing board. I sat down with my computer over a period of 2 months, every single day for about 8 hours. And I literally wrote the book. Then I took the book and I gave it to an editor who I paid thousands of dollars to give me critique. And we chapter by chapter went in. And by the time it was done, we had rewritten almost every chapter completely. By the time we were done talking about it and beating it around, the book was written 3 times. And then it went off to a team of readers. Now, this is where I think the reviews come in. I had a launch team of about 225 people. And these were people that were interested in helping me to read the book and share the book and write a review of the book. And these are people that were backing the book. And they just wanted, I said, like, you'll be the first to read it. I'll share it with you as it's done before the rest of the world sees it on a PDF. And then, you'll be able to read it. And that way, when the book launches, you can help us support it. And that's what happened.
Hold on a sec here. Why the fuck would anybody want to do that? It's like, what?
Yeah.
That sounds like I'm doing you a giant fuck favor. Why would I, so what if I get to read it ahead of everyone else?
I think this is
just to be a grumpy old man.
Yeah, this is a decade of building community. I think this is also this is what happens when you spend a decade serving, giving, contributing in the ways that we have as a community. I think people feel excited to support you. When you show, it's going back to what we talked about, right? When you show up enough for people and their dreams and their goals and their life, that people will then want to show up for you when it's go time. And I think that's what happened here.
It's interesting. I'm reminded by something that my friend and Legends and Losers guest, Mike Maples, says a lot. He's a legendary VC in Silicon Valley. And he says, we look for entrepreneurs who can create movements.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you really have created a movement with Front Row Factor.
So. I think so, yeah.
And so 225 people in the Front Row Factor movement raised their hand and said, yeah, John, I'd love to critique the book. I'd love to support you when it launches. Is that what happened?
That's it. It's 100% it.
And virtually all of them wrote Amazon reviews, I'm guessing, just by the volume of the reviews.
Yeah.
Some huge percentage, yeah.
Huge. And I'll tell you, here's what's fascinating. I was at a dinner not too long ago, Chris, and I'll leave out all the names here to protect those.
To protect the guilty?
To protect the guilty. But I was at a dinner with a guy who has made tens of millions of dollars and recently put out a book. And he looked at me and he said, so I'm pretty sure I sold a lot more books than you, but why do you have so many reviews on your book? Is it that you've just done so much good in the world that people just really like you? And somebody else at the table, I didn't respond at all. One of the other guys at the table goes, yes, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly why John got 127 reviews in the first couple of weeks or whatever it was. It was like because he spent his lifetime giving to the world and people honor that in that way. And I think that's it. And it's not a book about me. It's a book about our community. It's a book. All I did is I interviewed dozens and dozens of these people that were amazing people that we've supported and asked them how they were overcoming adversity and making the most of situations. And then I wrote about it. I told their stories, and I told funny stories, and I told touching stories. People laugh, people cry. People can learn the principles of life as we see it through these amazing stories. And I think Hannah Arendt said it best. They said, storytelling reveals meaning without committing to the error of defining it.
Slow down. Say that again.
Said storytelling reveals meaning without committing to the error of defining it. And that's what great stories do. Great stories allow people to take what they want away from the story, because a lot of stories reveal 5 to 10 different meanings, depending on how you see it or where you are in your life or how old you are. Or how,
as Clinton said, it depends on what your definition of is.
Right. A perfect example. Yeah. So
it is interesting because stories, as we know, are more powerful than facts.
100%.
So this may be my favorite example of this. Of course, we talk a lot about building a point of view in our book, Play Bigger, and how legendary companies differentiate with a point of view. And you clearly have a point of view. And a point of view is a fancy way of saying a story that frames a problem and then, of course, positions a solution. And the interesting thing to me about that is if you listen to Wall Street analysts talk about, pick a company, Amazon stock, what is very usual to hear are the words, oh, we like the story.
Yeah.
We don't like the story. And in dialogue with CFOs and CEOs, I say to them, you understand that the story about your business is more important than the facts about your business. And they go, no, that's absolutely not true. What drives our market cap is revenue growth, margin growth, EBITDA growth, and how well we forecast going forward. I said, look, all those things are important, absolutely. But the reason a company with no revenue and no employees can get purchased for billions of dollars in Silicon Valley is because they have a story about their category, their position in the category, and so forth. And so a company with virtually no revenue, virtually no earnings and profits and so forth, if they're positioned in the right category and they have a story that articulates that, ba-boom. And you can see the CEOs and CFOs' heads go like, how can it possibly be true that the story about my business is more important than the, quote, facts about my business?
Yep.
But to your point, stories give context, and also stories allow for people to sort of glean the context that they want from the story.
Correct. Yeah. And it took us a long time to figure out our story. I'll tell you this, for anybody out there listening that's getting started and it sounds like the Front Row story is just really well articulated and put together. It is, at this point, pretty well articulated and put together. But it took us 11 years to get to this point, because in the beginning, I remember sitting down with my friend Betsy Crouch and explaining to her the Front Row. And she said to me in response, I don't get it. That was her initial response, is I don't get it. Because I didn't know how to tell the story. I didn't know how to put it together. And it took me all these years. And even writing this book was one of the best things that we could ever do, because I said to our community, this took 2 years and about 40 people writing and editing to figure out how to tell our story, like what this actually all meant. We knew it was working. We knew the Front Row Foundation was working and having an impact, but we didn't know why entirely. So we actually said, like, what is it at work here? So let me give you an example of that specifically. Ready? We knew that people were impacted by the day. We knew people that were having transformed lives as a result. But we talked earlier in the show about being present, right? And then we talked about not living in the future and not living in the past. However, what we learned looking back after 11 years was that the future, like the hope for the future, when we had somebody that was sick and that we told them they were going to be going to see Billy Joel in the front row, that excitement brought power to the present moment. So literally, hope brings power to the present moment. It takes the future and brings it to now. That's not avoiding our reality. That's shaping it with hope for the future. That's different than wishful thinking. Wishful thinking says, I wish things were different. Hope says, I'm going to bring the power to the present to make the difference. Also, celebration.
Is that why, I hate to interrupt you, John, but is that why you think we all need things to look forward to?
100%.
Is that what you mean by hope? Because
100%. Yeah.
when I hear hope, I maybe it's just been, maybe I have the wrong context. And so I hear like, oh, like I'm going to sit in my basement and drink 4,000 beers a day and hope I win the lottery is sort of the place I hold hope.
Yeah.
Where it's like this thing out here that I have no ability to do anything with. But when you say, when you take hope and you put it in the context of what hope is looking forward to something powerful in the future, it changes the way I think about it. Is that what you mean by hope?
Thomas K., one of our recipients, was battling for his life in a wheelchair, young 20s, was a rugby player previously, and wanted to go see the Rugby World Cup in New Zealand. When we got him tickets and told his family that he was going to be going to the rugby match, every day in physical therapy, he fought harder so that he could stand for the national anthem. Now, that is the example of how hope brings power to the present moment. Knowing that we are going to do something, knowing that we want something, forces us to, or encourages us to act differently now. That's where hope is at its best. People could certainly use hope as an excuse for something of not doing it today, that they hope things were going to be different, but I call that wishful thinking. Or that's
okay. So that's how you distinguish between the two.
That's right.
Yeah, I got it. We all need things to look forward to.
Yeah. And also celebration, like drawing on past memories. People are like, I don't want to live in the past. I want to live in the now, or I'm future focused, or whatever examples they use. And I'd say, look, these things by themselves, anything could be dangerous. A puppy is great, but moving at 1,000 miles an hour, it could be dangerous to somebody, right? So it's like shot out of a cannon.
Beware of the dangerous puppy.
It could be dangerous to the puppy and you.
There was a punk alternative band in the old days called Skinny Puppy.
Skinny Puppy, yeah. Totally.
Are you starting a new band called Angry or Dangerous Puppy?
That's right. It's like the idea is anything told in a specific way, a particular story could be used for evil or negative, or it doesn't work. But it's like, look at celebration, right? I take another example of this guy, Mike, who is a 16-year-old, but developed mind of only about a 9-year-old, who went to go see a Pirates voyage show in Myrtle Beach. He's a big Pirates fan. And we sent him there with his family. It was the first time he was on an airplane, the first time he was in a hotel, the first time he ever saw the ocean, and he had an absolute blast. Now, in his final days in his hospital room, on his deathbed, our staff member walked in to say hello, to bring the family a gift, and saw him sitting on his hospital bed, flipping through his photo album of that day. And the mother told us that he constantly, whenever he feels at his worst, he goes back to that day, and it brings him joy, right? It brings him relief to the present moment to celebrate that. I think that in the past, we can bring energy of what was into what is. But it's not about living in the past. It's bringing energy from what was to what is. And it helps us to shape our reality now. And I think those two things, hope and celebration, celebrating what was in the past and hope for the future, they work best when they change something about now for you. And that's where we can remain in the present moment. That's where we can use those two tools.
Let me slow you down there. Hope for the future and celebration of the past. What were the exact words you used?
They bring power to the present moment.
They bring power to the present moment. So let's unpack that. Hope for the future and celebration of the past bring power to the present moment.
That's right. Yeah. And I think for most people, that's what it is. Like looking at your team, our team, every week, we celebrate their, what we call front row moments. Looking back on my day with my son, every night we sit down and say, Tiger, what was your front row moment from today?
Your son's name is Tiger.
Son's name is Tiger. My oldest boy. My youngest son is Ocean. Yeah. Tiger and Ocean. Very traditional names.
Yeah. And Berghoff's kids have great names too.
Yep.
You guys are funny with those names, or I should say fun with those names. Not to get overly serious, but I will for a second. And I won't say who the person was because I'm not sure it's appropriate. But But several years ago now, John, there was a person in my life who was deeply important to me and others in my family. And she was dying. Fucking cancer got her and got her too early. And she came out here on a trip, and it turned out to be, and we thought it would be her last trip. And while she was here, as you well know, the coast of California is really beautiful. We took lots of photos. And there was a photo of her and her husband. She came out here with her husband um, on the beach in beautiful Carmel, California. And for whatever reason, that photo really spoke to her, and she kind of kept that photo. And it was at her bedside of her and her husband. Fuck, I'm going to crack up now. I'm not crack up. I'm going to break down. And literally, while she was fucking dying, the nurses said to her, just think on this photo. Just hold this image in your mind. And while I can't know for sure, I do know for sure that that image was there, and she died. And so I can't tell you how much of that image made a difference in her passing, but it's something I remembered, and I thought, what did it mean for her to be able to hold on to that photograph? And of course, a photograph is just a way of capturing a memory of a moment. And so I never thought about it the way you put it, John, but that memory of the past, that celebration of that past moment, of that wonderful time on the beach, yeah, brought power to what you could argue, you could argue the ultimate moments in our lives as the moment we're born and the moment we die. And so it's an incredible thing you're saying, that surfacing those kinds of moments could actually make a material difference to somebody as they, go wherever we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very powerful.
Very powerful. And
can you say it again for me?
About the past and the future?
Yeah.
Well, hope is bringing the power of the future into the present moment.
Hope is bringing the power of the future into the present moment.
Yeah. And celebration is bringing the power of the past into the present moment. To me, that's what it's all about. That's what we never knew was happening until we looked back after 11 years and said, what is it about this? Like, what's happening here? And then we figured it out. It was these three things. It was hope, celebration, and then living in the moment. These were three things that were happening. And then we had to figure out that this hope and this celebration were sort of on the bookends. And in the middle, it was all about this moment. And that's when we were like, oh, everything's about making the most of the moment. A life is about being a moment maker. It's about making the most of favorable and unfavorable moments.
Let's unpack the unfavorable moments for a minute. I've always found it fascinating, and I don't mean this in maybe the shitty way it might sound, John, that a lot of people don't, to use your phrase, show up in those seminal, horrible moments because they run from it. Because I don't know, maybe emotionally they can't handle. I don't know. What do I know? I'm not a fucking psychologist. And so I remember being a young man, John, and making a decision. Was I going to be the man that, in this case, I was thinking about some words that my grandfather said to me that my grandfather said I was going to be, or not. And for me, when you make the decision to be that person, and when I say that person, what I mean is we all know who the legendary people are in our lives. We all know who we want in a foxhole. We all know who we can depend on no matter what. We all know whose values are going to carry the day no matter what the situation. We all know who the result producers are, that if we need a big result, we go to them. I'm talking about being that person. And yet, I think for a lot of us, it's hard to be that person in a horrible moment. Could you unpack that a little bit for me? How do we be that person in life's most difficult times?
Well, as soon as you said that, I thought about this woman whose daughter is fighting cancer, and she told me, one time. She said, if somebody tells me one more time that God will only give you what you can handle, I will punch them in their fucking face. If somebody tells me one more time that God will only give me what I can handle, uh, that she was very passionately upset about that. And here's why people get a little timid around people that are facing challenging situations. It's because we don't know how to show up at times. We don't know what's the right thing to say. And sometimes when we do say something like that, people get, upset about that we've said the wrong thing. It's a very sensitive time, right? There's an open wound. And so we just don't do anything. And I think that is dangerous, even though you will probably mess up from time to time when you show up for people that are in tough situations. But my counsel is this: oftentimes, it's just about doing something nice for them or with them. And you don't have to offer advice. I think one of the major challenges is that when people are in tough times, you don't have to offer advice to show your value. What you can do is you can show up with a warm meal. You can take them out for dinner. You can listen. You can ask questions. You could just sit with somebody. Like when I went out to see Hal, there was a couple of times when we just sat and watched UFC previews for Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather, right? Like we just watched
Yeah! The fight is finally announced and on.
It's on.
I know where I'm going to be on August 26th.
If you have $100,000, you'll be front row. Hold on. I should say this. Hold on.
I want you to finish your story before we get all frothed up about Mayweather, right. McGregor.
Yeah, what I should have said is if you care to part with $100,000, you'll be in front row. But here's the deal. The deal is that how we show up for people is just by that. Sometimes it's simply by being there. That when you go to somebody's funeral, when you go to somebody's hospital bed, when you go see somebody, you can just be there. You don't have to have something witty to say. Just remember that your presence alone, your smile, a hug, a question, and listen, you can always roll the dice. Sometimes you'll give advice and somebody's like, that's exactly what I needed to hear. And then you'll go give somebody else the same advice and they're like, if you tell me that again,
I'm going to fucking kill you.
When people see, here's something very important for people to understand. You can be a real optimist. You can be a life coach. And when somebody is going through a shitty situation, you can simply say, man, that sucks. You don't have to say life will only give you things that you can handle. You don't have to say something witty or some meme off of Instagram. You can literally just say, this fucking sucks.
Well, and the reality is, John, right? There are things in life that happen to us and the people around us and really the world. Just turn on the fucking news, that are truly horrible.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's no bullshit. You can put whipped cream on dog shit, but when you serve it to people, they know there's dog shit, right? Yeah. And if you have terminal cancer or, you're a refugee in Syria, there's no way around. You are dealing with a giant life shit sandwich.
Yeah, that's right. It's tough. Now, you don't have to live in that space, and you don't have to enable somebody with, as an example, I went through a bad breakup years ago, and one of the best things is my buddies just showed up with a beer, and, they were just hanging out with me. It was one of the best things.
Beer helps a lot.
No advice.
I find so does scotch. And I have to thank my dad on this one because my father, Bruce, John, when I was a young man, I was about 16 years old. My grandfather on my mother's side, so not his dad, but my mom's dad, had an ongoing battle with emphysema. And, as a kid, you don't really get it. It's like, oh, granddad's in the hospital again, right? And there was this one time granddad went in the hospital and I was with my dad and I think we were having lunch, if I remember right. And he said to me, all those stories your grandfather tells you, some of which you're tired of hearing. If there's anything you want to hear him say or anything you want to say to him, now's the time. And I both understood it and didn't, at 16. But here's what I did do. I went to the fucking hospital. And I spent a lot of time with my grandfather because I understood what my father said. And that was, if my memory's right, that was in about November when Bruce, my dad, told me that. and my grandfather died early in the following year. And I spent as much time with him as I could, and we had all those powerful conversations. And so my dad, in a very real way as a young man, taught me how to complete with someone who's dying. And I have used that, I hate to call it a skill, but I think it is, or an ability to be present in that moment and to fucking show up.
Yeah. I think that for everybody out there listening, it's showing up for people now, and it's showing up for people in the end. And sometimes we don't get that gift of knowing when the end is coming, a tragic death. But I can relate to what you're saying, because my wife, 3 weeks ago, her aunt was in Russia, in Siberia, where my wife is from, and fighting for her life. And Tatiana came to me and said, "I need to go right now. Like literally, I need to go to Russia. My heart says I need to go." And Tatiana, I took both boys for 2 weeks. Tatiana went, and she was there 14 days, and on the 12th day, her aunt passed. And this is an aunt, by the way, that she talked to every single day in the last 11 years that I've known my wife, and very, very close with her. But for my wife, showing up in that moment made her so happy that she could be there in the end, holding her hand, telling her everything was okay, and sending love with her in each and every moment. I'm so happy that she could be there. And I'm so happy she had those final conversations.
Yeah. And so it's, I forget who said it, but I once heard, John, it's easy to be great when it's great. But
Yeah,
who
that's right.
are you when the shit hits the fan?
That's right.
And whether the shit hits the fan is somebody dying, or a crazy critical moment in your business, or, anything like that. The question is, who are we going to be when we find ourselves in life's foxhole? Who are we going to be for ourselves, and who are we going to be for the other people around us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the most powerful exercises is to look at your life and think about the end. I mean, this is lots of people do this exercise in lots of different ways, but it's like, hey, when it's your funeral, what do people say about you? There's something very powerful at looking at the end. I wrote about this in the book, where I took a journal out and I just wrote my birth. I put a dot over here. I put death. I put a dot over here. And I just wrote, let's just say it's 100 years for argument's sake. Let's say there's,
I hope it is, and I hope it's even more than that, John.
yeah. And it's, let's just say that 80 is about the time when my body starts giving way and I can't quite live the way I'm living now. Let's just say, for argument's sake. And I thought, I just turned 42, and I took that dot and put it on that piece of paper. And to me, that was a real eye opener. And I've heard other ways of people playing with this exercise of knowing our immortality to create some vitality in our lives. One guy counted out, averaged how many weeks he would have in the rest of his life, and took a marble for every Saturday that he had, put it in a big bowl, and every Saturday he'd move a marble over. It's this physical representation of, like, this is my life, kind of being lived one marble at a time, but something tangible, something to bring us back to that moment, some act or tradition that says this is a life that will eventually expire. It's the one thing we all have in common, is that nobody makes it out of here alive.
It's interesting, as I listen to you talk, I'm reminded of one of the first business books I read, and a book that as a young man made an incalculable difference to me. And that book's called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber.
Yep,
I know it's a small business classic, and one I recommend to every entrepreneur. And the interesting thing about the E-Myth, I forget exactly where Gerber introduces it, but it's prominent in the book. If you remember, he does this exercise where he brings you to your funeral, to your own funeral, right? And what I love about the way he has this conversation in the E-Myth is he has it in the context of business. And the reason I think that's important is, of course, you and I have one life. That's why I hate this fucking term work-life balance. It suggests that there's work here and life there, and we're balancing them. Like, well, fuck you. There's life, and there's what I do with my life, period. That's right. And so what I loved about what Gerber did, and it helped me very much as an 18, 19-year-old man, was to do exactly, mentally this concept that you're talking about with the marbles, but in the context of the business. Like, oh, okay, so I'm going to create a business And at the end of my life, people are going to say things. And actually, my life, what I got from that is my life and my business are deeply connected. It's so powerful.
And for me, that was going back to the beginning of creating my category or my life. And I didn't think of it in category until I actually met you and read your book, which I love, by the way. And you're a
Thank
great
you.
you're a great storyteller. That this is about harmony. This was about things that all worked in and connected to one another. They had to. It's like why I started the Front Row Dads. So I was like, I'm a dad.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. I had this conversation recently with a good friend of mine, a gal, and she said, Christopher, she's the mother of boys. And she said, where do I go to teach my boys? What are the third party things other than her family and her husband, of course, but what are the other things that will teach my boys how to be good men?
Mm. Yeah,
And I didn't have a great answer for that.
totally.
So
Neither do I.
and I love some of, when you talk about front row dads, one of the things I love that you say, and you're very upfront about it, is you're not pretending that you're the greatest dad in the world. You just want to have this conversation called, how do I be a legendary dad? So to unpack front row dads for me.
Yeah, well, Front Row Dads started with how do I create something that is in alignment with all of my values? And being a dad is really important to me right now. So how can I get my business to relate to that in some sort of way? I wanted to go to an event. I've been to I've been Tony events and Landmark and all sorts of different personal growth or business growth conferences. But I looked at being a dad. I'm like, all right, so if being a dad is one of my highest priorities in life, and you could argue the priority, then where do I go to work on that? And I couldn't find the place that excited me, so we created one, and that's how it all began. In fact,
And what happens at front row dads, or what is it? Is it a
so
seminar? Is it a workshop? What is it?
twice a year retreat. We have about 50 guys that get together. These are high level entrepreneurs that come together twice a year for about 3 days, and it's an experiential process. It's shoulder to shoulder bonding.
Does that mean we take LSD?
Right. Yeah, there's ayahuasca ceremony on day one.
Is there any sort of, do we pound drums, or is there any?
Well, if Berghoff is there, you're pounding drums.
Yeah. He's the only guy I know who travels with a giant drum and plays it in his hotel room.
Totally. Hey, that guy. I was thinking about that this morning, of how he's a moment maker, by the way. He travels with this drum, and at the moment's notice, he's playing drums in the lobby of hotels or wherever, and he's creating moments.
That'll definitely create a moment, particularly depending on the time of the evening.
That's right. Yeah. So, but these guys get together and they want to, here's the thing. It's like, they want to not only get reconnected or deepen their sense of purpose as a dad. That's important to them. They want a brotherhood of like-minded or like-hearted guys that understand and want to have a conversation, both what's working and what's not. You put 50 epic guys in a room, and some of these guys have, listen, we've got people that are firemen. We have people that are real estate, financial investors. We've got guys that sold businesses for 40 million bucks. And, they're just some guys that are retired, some guys that are in the middle of their hustle, but they all come together and they've got this mindset of, look, I want to be a great dad. And I don't want to just say that this is important to me. Look at your calendar. Have you ever heard that? This idea that if you want to know your values, look at your calendar.
Yeah.
So these guys are like 365 days out of the year. I'm taking 3% of my entire year to work on being a dad. And we both know the difference of working in your business or on your business. But most guys as dads don't understand that as a father. It's the same thing that applies. I mean, I opened up my computer one day and I looked at it and I was like, I got a folder for taxes. I got a folder for my business. I got a folder for all this shit, but I don't have a folder for my children. Where's my folder for my kids? Where am I taking a moment to retreat for myself and work on my family? I wasn't doing it.
It's interesting that we're having this conversation, John. I don't think I'll ever forget. So we had 4-star General Stanley McChrystal on Legends and Losers.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, and he's General McChrystal, right? His last job was he was in charge of the Allied forces in Afghanistan, and he was really the guy who said, "Hey, listen, traditional approach to war is not working, and we need to reimagine this whole thing." And he had to sit down and have a conversation with the president of the United States about that. So this is a non-trivial guy, right? And I don't think I'll forget, John, when we first started our Legends and Losers dialogue at the very beginning. What he's asked me to call him Stan. I have a hard time calling him Stan, but okay. What Stan says is, he talks about what it means for him to be a grandfather and his feelings about not being around for his son because he was deployed. And that's where he starts the conversation. Like, a 4-star general starts there.
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting, isn't it, when we get to those moments of reflection in our life, what shows up?
Yeah. Well, my dad, a Navy captain, and to this day, still regularly expresses sorrow for him not showing up more for me as a dad. You talk about showing up. That's his number one regret in life, is not showing up more at the moments that it counted. And I think it's a lot like contributing. It's like, here's the thing. We always say, next week, when I get my business lined up, or this weekend, I'll spend more time with my kids, or next month, once I get through this storm. And what you realize is, like, what I've realized is that I was like, I've been in a 10-year startup with my business. It's like, I'm 10 years in and I'm still in startup mode. It's never it's not like
May you always be in startup mode.
Right. I have to make my children a priority. This actually happened at a party when somebody said, "What do you do?" And which, by the way, I think is one of the laziest questions, but it's like, I answered it by saying, started going into like, well, I started this charity and I'm a speaker and I'm an author, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, well, wait a minute. No, hold on, stop. I'm a dad and I'm a husband. That's what I do. When I'm not doing that, I happen to be speaking and running this charity and doing these things, which helps provide for my family. But it was actually a shift in my mind where I thought, why don't I identify as my primary focus in life as being a dad and a husband? I can always make money in whatever way, right? I'll always figure out how to take care of my family, but I need to make that my primary mission. And I realized that for a long time, I talked about being a great dad, but I wasn't. I was all talk, not a lot of walk. It was always like, family's so important, but my calendar didn't show you that. I always talked about being a great dad, but I was not being, by the way, I didn't beat my children. I wasn't screaming at them. Well, I did scream a couple of times, but my point is,
maybe we should beat our children a little more than we do, though. I think sometimes
beating and punishing, or spank, different topics. But
well, there's beating and then there's beating.
That's right. Yeah.
Although the Ramones did write a legendary song called "Beat on the Brat with a Baseball Bat." Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Different type of beating.
Yeah, I think so, probably.
But my whole thought was this: it just needs to be a priority for me, and that's all. It's just getting clear. Going back to the earlier part of our conversation, this is where mindfulness came in. Mindfulness is enlightenment. Enlightenment is just turning on the lights. So many times we're just walking around, stubbing our toe because it's dark. And when you turn on the lights and you're like, let me be honest with myself, right? Let me be honest. I'm not a fucking epic dad. I'm not a legendary dad. Let's be honest. And then address it, and then do something about it, and then make it.
Did somebody tell you that, or did you come to that on your own, John?
Both.
Who told you, hey, John, you know what? Kind of bullshit on the legendary dad thing.
So a couple of people in my life, I've actually had dads even to this very day. A part of what's great about our group is that we ask for our dads to call each other out. I had a conversation with one of our front row dads, Tim, and he said, what makes somebody a great friend? I was like, I don't know. What do you think? And he said, it's when somebody can just like shoot you straight. They tell you what other people don't want you to hear. That's a really great friend. And he's like, and he brought something to me and told me something that most people wouldn't tell me. And to this day, I still have people challenging me. And it's forcing me to take a look at my engagement with my life, my family, etc. So, but first, to answer your question directly, it was my wife. My wife is the first one that came to me, and my wife is Russian and no bullshit, as direct as can be. And came to me and we like had this conversation, and I didn't hear her at first. I didn't believe her. I was like, I'm an amazing dad. I'm an amazing provider. But we sometimes think that our greatest providing is like, I'm going to show my kids how to work hard and follow their passions and provide all this income and all these things. And you just finally realize it's not what your kids need most. Yes, those are beneficial things, but what your kids need most is your engagement, your presence, your time. That's the first thing they need.
So, John, before we kick out of this wave, is there anything else?
Yeah. Oh man, I want to encourage everybody out there to just make the most of this day, whatever that looks like for you. It might be shitty circumstances and you might have the perfect glassy chest high wave coming in at you, but listen, you've got to just try to make the most of what you've got at the present moment. And I'm not going to make it sound awesome because it's not always awesome, but you just do the best you can with what you have. And I think that's really what I've learned at the end is, going back to our buddy Hal, we brought up multiple times, is like, look, he's got a shitty situation right now and he's still making the most of the situation. So, I pray for blue skies and glassy water for everybody, but it's not always going to be that way. And when it's not, then make sure you're surrounded by people that you love. Make sure that you try to show up for yourself in the morning, show up for others throughout your day. And that's it. I just wish everybody the best.
And Jon, on that note, thank you so much. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for your awesome haircut. And thank you for taking all that time. I know what it takes to write a book that you feel like is your life's work or is a major part of your heart and soul. And you absolutely wrote that with the Front Row Factor. And that's awesome.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. We're very, very proud of it. We hope people check it out. The Front Row Factor up on Amazon. It's at our website, frontrowfactor.com.
Thanks, Jon. You're a legendary guy, and I so appreciate having you in my life.
This is awesome, man. Thank you, buddy.
We'll speak soon.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Whew. There he is, Jon Vroman. So great to have him on. Thank you, Jon. Now, if there's somebody in your life that you think would enjoy this episode with Jon, why not share it now? We love it when you share Legends and Losers. Also want to tell you about another event with onelifefullylived.org, the nonprofit that is empowering people to dream, plan, and live your best life. We have our big West Coast conference coming up in Sacramento, October 21 and 22, 2017, Sacramento, California. And I want to tell you something amazing. My dear friend and one of the most important mentors I've ever had in my life, Legends and Losers guest, Bix Bixen, will be doing a very special presentation and interaction at the One Life Fully Lived event in Sacramento. So if you've heard the Bix episode, and Tom Schwab, the founder and CEO of Interview Valet, and Interview Valet is a company that works with thought leaders to help get them on podcasts to market their ideas and concepts. And he and his firm exclusively represent me, although why, I don't know. Anyway, Tom says that the Legends and Losers episode with Bix Bixen is the single best podcast episode he's ever heard. And Tom's the person that I know that has listened to the most podcast episode. And so it really gives you a sense for how powerful Bix is and a dialogue with Bix is. So check that episode out. And equally importantly, come visit us in Sacramento at One Life Fully Lived. And you'll get an opportunity to spend time with Bix and many other legendary people and presenters. Also like to ask you, please subscribe to Legends and Losers at legendsandlosers.com. That's the best place to find us. All right. We would like to thank HarperCollins, Instant Classic, Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. Equity Directory, connecting legendary startups to the talent and resources they need to build a legendary business. Our friends at NetSuite, #1 in Cloud ERP. Come out and see us on the Next Ready Business Tour. Spiro, the sales app for salespeople and sales managers who like to make money at Spiro.ai. The Front Row Factor, transform your life with the art of movement making. The legendary new bestseller from our friend and today's guest, Jon Vroman. PursuingResults.com, producers of legendary podcasts, and this one too. As I mentioned, Interview Valet, podcast interview marketing at interviewvalet.com. Get yourself on some podcasts. Bixen 2, Joe Bixen and Bix Bixen, coaching legendary business leaders to hack the future and produce the material outcomes that matter to them. The smash hit book, Never Split the Difference, by HarperCollins, written by our friend and guest on a spectacular episode. Love this guy, Chris Voss, former FBI negotiator. The Unbreakable Mind podcast with our friend and guest, Navy SEAL, the amazing Mark Devine, Unbreakable Mind, and the World Wildlife Fund, because our planet and our wildlife matter. Now, this oddcast is a sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we would love it if you shared the shit out of it. All rights do remain disturbed. This oddcast is produced in a studio that clearly contains nuts. We also must warn you, Legends and Losers may contain forward-looking statements, backward-looking statements, and present moment-looking statements, and completely insane statements. And actual results in future events could differ differ materially. The beauty of a dyslexic mind.